Welcome back.
Welcome back.
I don't know, we keep saying that, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think now it's episode 9 now
Yeah,
of
episode 9.
because I had in my notes here podcast episode 1 because I have a template that I copied. But yeah, so episode 9, and this time we're looking at a book that we found in Cal Newport's Deep Work, a reference to it. And the book is called How to Live on 24 Hours a Day. Yeah. And the sort of joke there is that normally people say things like, how do I live on, I don't know, 100 Rand a day or something like that. Where in this case, he's saying, how do we live on 24 hours a day? Which is a funny title, but also quite a serious one.
Yeah. I think, I'm sure we'll discuss it. It's just a matter of how I think we prioritize how much you spend in a day instead of what's given to us and that's given to everyone. And I think that's one point he makes, that everyone has 24 hours at their disposal. It's about how you spend those 24 hours, and the acquiring of money is done in that 24 hours.
Yeah.
So it's about you thinking about what you would do with those 24 hours.
The full
24 hours, to make the money that you want, essentially.
And I think money as in like not necessarily actual money, but just the
value, or let's say, of that time. I think he does make a reference of the whole time is money thing, but it's like quickly brushes on it. But
it touches on a lot of interesting things. Should we dig into a book summary?
Yes.
Okay, so How to Live on 24 Hours a Day by Arnold Bennett was published in 1908. The book looks at the work day and the time outside of that, what Bennett calls the day within a day. It claims that the most valuable view of the day is not to focus on just the work day, which most people do, but rather to look at the day within the day, the day almost outside of the workday. So that time outside of the workday is often viewed as a pointless time where one just waits for the next day to begin. But what makes this worse is that Bennett says on average, people don't actually give their full attention and effort to their work. And so missing out on the day within a day is even more tragic. Further than that, general people don't know how to spend their spare time, and time Bennett considers one of the most valuable resources. There are a lot of books and articles on how to live on X dollars a day, but not on how to live on 24 hours a day. This book aims to help people to truly live on 24 hours a day, to spend that time wisely. The book goes on to discuss how people often have an underlying desire to do more with their life, but don't. People feel like they have things left undone, and they'll do them when they have more time. It then goes on to give tips on how to approach one's day within a day as to fully live. So that's the general picture of what he's aiming at. It's a really interesting idea.
I should say, I think you mentioned this to me, I think, even before we read Carl Newport's book, but of just the idea of how we focus so much on our workday, but yet that's just a portion. And I think, you've said, that's only a third of our day, and then pretty much the other third is going to sleep, depending on how long you sleep. I love my sleep, so 8 hours, is, so I'd say the other third goes to sleep, but you have 8 hours. That's, the same length, same time span as your work hours that so often we do absolutely nothing with. I know I'm one of those people that once they knock off, they're like, oh, okay, cool, kick my shoes off, day is done, but reading this book, I realized there's actually a lot more that you can do with that. And I mean, not only just then, but also like the time before you actually start work and the time after work. You
Yeah, exactly.
can, I mean, besides saying that you need time to rest, you can easily get 5 to 6 hours more out of that 8 hours that can be very beneficial. I mean, that's another week in itself that um, you can benefit from or grow from. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we we don't value time as much as we should.
Yeah.
And I think getting that other third, like you were talking, and saying, okay, this is actually real time that I can do real things with is extremely valuable. And yeah, it also same for me. I like to do things and explore, and generally I like to be busy, but I don't make proper use of that other third. And that's not to say that the whole work thing is like, okay, don't even like put a much effort into work. He's saying like you can go and put full on effort into work,
Yeah.
maybe not like 100% capacity so that you just feel absolutely finished, but put like 95% capacity, like don't mess around at work, go for it. And then afterwards, you still will have lots of time
Yeah.
to do stuff. So do stuff. Don't just, the word he uses is being idle.
Yeah.
I think if he was living in our time, because this was like 120 or so years ago. So if he was living in our time, he wouldn't have used the word idleness. He would have said sitting on the couch watching TV.
Being a couch potato. Or
Yeah,
something.
couch potato, yeah. But yeah. Okay, so I think let's look at some of the key takeaways. So we're going to look at about 4 key takeaways, and
Yeah.
then we're just going to hash through them. I'm going to read a little bit from the book, and then we
We'll
can take it
discuss,
from
yeah.
there. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first point, and then I'm going to jump between chapter 1 and chapter 4 and just take 2 snippets from there. But I'll read a little piece. So the first point is thinking about how to spend your spare time. So it says in the book, philosophers have explained space, they have not explained time. It is the inexplicable raw material of everything. It is, or with it, all is possible. Without it, nothing. The supply of time is truly a daily miracle, an affair genuinely astonishing when one examines it. You wake up in the morning and lo, your purse is magically filled with 24 hours of unmanufactured tissue of the universe for all your life. It's yours. It's the most precious of possessions, a highly singular commodity showered upon you in a manner as singular as the commodity itself. For remark, no one can take it from you. It's unstealable, and no one receives either more or less than you can receive. Talk about an ideal democracy. In the realm of time, there is no aristocracy of wealth or no aristocracy of intellect. Genius is never rewarded by even an extra hour a day. And there's no punishment. Waste your indefinitely precious possession as much as you will, and the supply will not be withheld from you. No mysterious power will say, "This man is a fool. I have not a knave." If he does not deserve the time, he shall be cut off at the meter. It is more certain than consoles of payment and income, and is not affected by Sundays. Moreover, you cannot withdraw it on the future. It's impossible to get into debt. You can only waste a passing moment. You cannot waste tomorrow. It is kept from you, and it is kept for you. You cannot waste the next hour. It is kept for you. I say, as I said, the affair is a miracle, is it not? You have to live on this 24 hours a day of daily time. Out of it, you spin off health, pleasure, money, content, respect, and the evolution of your immortal soul. Its right use, its most effective use, is the matter of the highest urgency and of the most thrilling acuity. All depends on it. Your happiness, the elusive prize that you're clutching for, my friends, depends on that. Strange that newspapers, so enterprising and up to date as they are are not full of how to give more on which are so full of how to live on a given income of time. Instead, they should be saying how to live on the given income of money. Sorry, it's the opposite way around. Let me read it again. Strange that the newspapers, so enterprising and up-to-date as they are not full of how to live on a given income of time. Instead, they are on how to live on a given income of money. Money is far more commoner than time. So yeah, that's gives, I think, a good sense of his view of the importance of time.
Yeah.
And I think it also kind of clearly states, even now, 120-ish years later, it states fairly well
That
the
time.
general the general view of time as just like, it's not really that important, but actually people should be writing about like how do we think about living on that 24 hours a day, whereas people almost more talk about how we can squeeze as much productivity out of time. They don't just talk about generally how to use time.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about time management and all that instead of how to use time to the best of your ability. I think that's the sort of sentiment that he's sort of given. And I mean, I think I just like the part where he says that everyone sort of gets the same amount of time.
Yeah.
You know, be it a genius or not, you all get 24 hours. And also the fact that it's saved for you. It's not all given to you at once. And up until whatever point, you've had the same time as someone that was born at the same exact day and time as you are. You know, it's just how well
no more,
you've
no less.
yeah, it's just but how well you've spent your time up
Yeah.
until that point. And I think he's trying to emphasize that, you know, that yes, we all want money, we all need money and all that, but that can be made, you can make more or less in the 24 hours that you're given. You know, what's more important is the time at hand and how you use that, and that's what equates to essentially what you earn.
Yeah.
You know, to put it loosely, it's not the exact,
the
but that's
value,
the idea is that the value comes from the time at your disposal.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all have the same amount of it to create value with.
Yeah, I mean, from this point, like, let's say when tomorrow starts, when midnight strikes, we all have the same 24 hours the following day.
Yeah.
No more, no less. You know, it's just a matter of how I spend my 24 and how you spend your 24 hours. I can use it to ruin my life. You can use it to become the next Elon Musk. You know, it's one of those.
And he what's interesting as well is you would think that he would be someone who would push on, because he seems like someone who writes a lot and does that kind of thing, and he enjoys literature, and you would think he would push on the idea of saying like, okay, so you have now realized the value of time, so go and get a bunch of books and read them. But he's actually like, no, most people view life as we have the choice of idleness or we have the choice of like literature. Like you can watch TV in our modern world, or you can like read something. And people don't think about like, okay, there's nothing else really to do.
And I think, sorry to
No,
cut
go
you
for it.
off. There was a section, and I think I found that interesting. Probably one of the few things I remember in this book. But it talks about how we should avoid reading good books. I don't know if you
Good
remember
novels.
good novels.
Yeah.
And his reasoning for that is exactly that. We rush to literature, but we usually pick up the literature that we enjoy. And that doesn't actually cultivate thought, because it's either in agreement to what we already think, and we enjoy it so much that we just peruse through it. But the good material to read is stuff that you know, we won't think of on a day-to-day basis. And the reason for that is that actually is what helps. And I think it talks about having time of concentration. That what
Yeah, we'll
helps
chat
us.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what helps us concentrate. And I think the one thing was reading poems. Is like
Yeah.
that's the best thing you can do. And I mean, it's been years that I did enjoy that side of literature, and I was like, it's quite true. Poems are not straightforward. You have to really take time to analyze them to actually, and again, everyone can analyze a poem in their own way. The writer's reasoning for it and you analyzing might be close, but everyone will view it in a different way.
Yeah.
Another thing I can add is the same as the Bible. Depending on what point in time you read certain scriptures, you might view them totally different just because of how your understanding is and how your mind sort
Yeah.
of reflects that. So yeah, it's quite interesting that, like you said, him mentioning so much about time. He doesn't say, okay, then now go read about it and try and master this concept of time, but rather it's like you need to follow certain things to get the best out of your day, rather.
Yeah, and I think he goes and he says, okay, that the literature thing, that's one way to spend time, but don't be confused that that's the only way to spend your, let's call it, spare time. It's not the only way to spend your spare time. There's lots of other things. If you don't like literature, even if you don't like the idea of like going and reading poems and things like that, then and I would say that I fall into that category, and I used to very much fall into that category, like of not liking any literature. But now I do like reading, and I'm slowly sort of refining a taste for it. But he says, even if you don't like it, even if you don't have a taste for it at all, that's fine. Don't worry about it. There's a whole bunch of other things. And then he goes on, there's one chapter where he talks about art, and he says, you can spend your time, because remember, we're under the broad concept of spending time. Like, how do you spend your time wisely? How do you think about it? So if it's not literature, then what else? And then he says, oh, well, there's art. So you can look at music and trying to have a better appreciation for that. If you go to a concert or something like that, to have a better appreciation for all of the different instruments that are being played, and to try and focus more on those things rather than just letting it sort of pass you by.
Yeah.
And then he says, but if you don't like that, that's fine as well.
Yeah.
And then he says, you can do other art. It can be paintings or whatever. And then even if you don't like art at all, there's lots of other things. Go and observe the waves and look at them, and then think about how the waves end up turning into vapor, which end up turning into ice, which end up, etc., etc. And there's all these different things that we can do outside of just this idle time. And again, spending time watching TV and things. And that's not to say don't spend time watching TV, but it's just, is that the thing that you're wanting to do? Or if you sit and think about how you're spending your time, then will you still say, oh, okay, that's how I want to spend it?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then there are these
There are
all kinds of other ways.
You might have wasted your time now, but you wasted it to find the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the art one was actually quite interesting, where he was kind of saying you need to take the time to sort of, and to me, I feel like that's even more beneficial. It's like you're using your time to acquire knowledge in a field that you've never been interested in. And I think he even mentioned that probably if you take that time, the next time you're at an orchestra and someone kicks off like a say harmony, you can pick it up, or what instrument that was. And I mean, if you had to take me to an orchestra right now, I'll probably enjoy the sound, but I won't dial it down to what was played, what and when, and what key.
Yeah.
But he kind of encourages people to do that. That if in their spare time they enjoy going to orchestras, then take the time to understand how that musical comes together, and again, like in that essence, and I think that's what adds up to you, like you said, you not being idle. By you taking the time, it might be seen as leisure, but the moment you try to understand everything behind that music, you're actually not being idle, but proactive about learning about that art, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, when you do that, when you learn about things, and I think most people will understand this in sort of a deeper sense. When you start to learn about something and get a better understanding of its nuances, you can appreciate it more.
Yeah.
So if you, for example, are a cinematographer, you would probably enjoy just a old school movie more than I would, because I'm like, this is old, I want something new. And so you can appreciate more. And for the new stuff, if you're a cinematographer, you can appreciate all of the nuance and the effects that are going on and things like that. Or if you're a storyteller, you would appreciate the storyline more, or less if it's a bad storyline. But generally, when we learn about things, whatever it might be, we cultivate a better appreciation for it, which is great.
But the only reason that happens is if you've invested time to learn about that particular thing. I mean, maybe I speak for myself, but I probably you share this. I think multimedia systems sparked the photography, appreciation for us. I think before that we was like, but we did that mojo, and all of a sudden we're all like, oh, okay, like we had, I mean, before I knew that it was a profession, but it was just like, oh, someone has time on their hand and they can do this, but then you're introduced, because funny enough, I think there were like 3 or 4 modules that photography came in, because even in physics there was actually a practical that we did to sort of, probably forgot most of it, but just how do you adjust your settings and how that affects the image and
the
all
aperture
that.
and all of
the
those
aperture,
kinds of
the
things,
shutter speed and all that. And we did that in physics, not even in the multimedia sort of course. And if you, and again, any Jack and Joe taking a picture, don't think wants to know or appreciates the physics behind taking a picture, but I dove into a bit of that. Then multimedia system was how you frame a picture, rules of thirds, which, is still stuck in my head, like those tiny things that before were just there. There was no weight associated with it, but after spending time and investing time in it, then, as you said, cultivates the interest in that area,
Yeah, it's quite amazing. And it's, as you learn more about those different pieces, like you said, with the physics and the multimedia systems and photography within that, you can appreciate more nuance because of these different facets of how to think about it. And I think that goes for pretty much anything, which is quite wild. Okay, so carrying on, in chapter 4, they talk about organizing the day within a day. So this is just another little piece to read, to reflect on how to spend your time well and how to think about spending time well. So it goes like this. Generally, this general attitude is utterly illogical and unhealthy, since it formally gives the central prominence to a patch of time and a bunch of activities with which man's one idea is to get through and have done with. If man makes 2/3 of his existence subservient to 1/3, for which admittedly he has no absolute feverish zest, how can he hope to fully live completely? He cannot. If my typical man wishes to live fully and completely, he must, in his mind, arrange the day within a day. In this inner day, a Chinese box in a larger Chinese box must begin from 6 p.m. and end at 10 a.m. It's a day of 16 hours, and during all these 16 hours, he has nothing whatever to do but cultivate his body and his soul and his fellow men. During those 16 hours, he is free. He is not a wage earner. He is not preoccupied with monetary cares. He is just as good as any man with a private income. This must be his attitude. His attitude is all important. His success in life, much more than the amount on which his estate executors have to pay estate duty, depends on it. What you say, that given full energy to those 16 hours might lessen the value of the business 8? Not so. On the contrary, it will assuredly increase the value of the business 8. And then this is one of the things that was quoted in the Deep Work book. He says, one of the chief things which my typical man has to learn is that the mental faculties are capable of continuous hard activity. They do not tire like an arm or a leg. All they want is change, not rest, except in sleep. So, yeah, I think there's some key ideas there. The one is one which we discussed, which is you have the 1/3 and the 2/3. And normally what we do is the 1/3, i.e. the work day, we make that the prominent thing, and we make the 2/3 subservient to that 1/3. Instead, what he's saying here is like, don't think about it like that. Think about the day within a day and use that day. And then he goes on to say further, we often think at the end of that work day, we've used up all of our mental faculties and we finished. But he's saying, no, what people need to learn is that we actually don't really tire as easily, at least. He's saying like at all almost. We don't tire when it comes to the mental faculties. We think we do, but actually all that we do is all that we want is a bit of change. We don't necessarily need to rest in the same way that our body need rest if we do too many pull-ups or something like that. Like for me, half a pull-up. So I think it's another helpful way of thinking about how do you spend that time.
I think it's more of like a context switching thing, that we, at the end of the 8-hour workday, it's only, I mean, like you said, there can be times when we are tired, but it's more of we're tired of the repetition of doing that thing, and rather we need to just switch the context a bit, just do something completely different, and then it will seem as if, we're not tired at all.
He uses some good examples at times where he basically talks about you get home from work and you have a nice date lined up, you're going to have lots of energy. But we think when we get home from a busy day, then we don't have energy because we just have to do something that we don't really feel like doing or something. But if we can realize that we actually do have energy, it's just our mind tricking us, then that can be very helpful. Okay, so moving on to the second point. So we looked at how do we think about spending time and that. And then the other key takeaway is valuing blocks of time. So how do you spend your time is one, but how do you value blocks of time? There's some nice stuff that he has written. So I'll read another massive block. So there's two little sections here. One is about the morning and one is about the evening. So I'll read the morning one first quick. You get onto and maybe a little bit of context here as well is going to be helpful. So this book is almost written, you can think about it, to men. In London who in the morning they wake up, they go and get on a train, they read their newspapers on the train, and then they go to work, they work their full day, they get back home and they're tired and they sort of sit and relax. That's kind of the the typical man that he is
On the
talking
turn. I
about.
was going to say in this day and age, I don't think this book could have gone to publication.
Yeah, yeah. He's not like super.
No, he's not. But there's just very little reference to the
To
other
women,
gender.
yeah.
I think it was just once at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. So yeah, he says here, you get onto the morning train with your newspaper and you calmly and majestically give yourself to your newspaper. You don't hurry. You know you have at least half an hour of security in front of you. As your glance lingers idly at the advertisements of shipping and songs on the outer pages, your air is the air of a leisure man, man wealthy in time, of some other planet where you have 124 hours a day instead of 24. I'm an impassioned reader of newspapers. I've read 5 English and 2 French dailies, and the news agents alone know how many weeklies regularly. I'm obliged to mention this personal fact, lest you should accuse me of a prejudice against newspapers when I say that I object to the reading of newspapers on the morning train. Newspapers are produced with rapidity to be read with rapidity. There is no place in my daily program for newspapers. I read them as I may in odd moments, but I do read them. The idea of devoting to them 30 or 40 consecutive minutes of wonderful solitude, for nowhere can one more perfectly immerse oneself in oneself than in a compartment of full silent withdrawn smoking males. So he says that wonderful solitude and wasting it is so repugnant to me. That's what he says. I cannot possibly allow you to scatter priceless pearls of time with such oriental lavishness. You are not the Shah of time. Let me respectfully remind you that you have no more time than I have. No newspaper reading on trains. I have already put by about 3/4 of an hour for use. So he's saying, like, don't read the newspaper on the trains because that's such a nice block of time. And if you use that block of time properly, now you have 3/4 of an hour that you didn't have before.
Yeah.
But instead, people waste it lavishly. And then he says a similar thing in the evening. What I suggest is that at 6 o'clock, you look facts in the face and admit that you're not tired, because you're not, and you arrange your evening so that it's not cut in the middle by a meal. By doing so, you will have a clear expanse of at least 3 hours. I do not suggest that you employ 3 hours a night of your life using up your mental energy, but I do suggest that you might, for a commencement, employ an hour and a half every other evening in some important and constructive cultivation of the mind. You will still be left with 3 evenings for friends, bridge, tennis, domestic scenes, odd reading, pipes, gardens, pottery, and prize competitions. You will still have the terrific wealth of 45 hours between 2 p.m. on Saturday and 10 a.m. on Monday. If you persevere, you will soon want to pass 4 evenings, perhaps even 5, in some sustained endeavor to be genuinely alive. And you will fall out of that habit of muttering to yourself at 11:15 p.m., time to be thinking about going to bed. The man who begins to go to bed 45 minutes before he opens his bedroom door is bored. That is to say, he is not living. But remember, at the start, those 90 nocturnal minutes thrice a week must be the most important minutes in the 10,080. They must be sacred, quite sacred as a dramatic rehearsal or a tennis match. Instead of saying, sorry, I can't see you, old chap, but I have to run off to the tennis club, you must say, but I have to work. Yeah. So that thinking about time blocks, I think, is where we often go wrong. And it can be quite hard to do and put into practice, but it's not impossible. And if we can do that, then it frees up a lot more in terms of ability to do focused work and those kinds of things. So he's suggesting, saying, okay, put aside sort of 30 to 45 minutes in the morning, and then put aside an hour and a half every other morning in the evenings. And if you can do that, he says somewhere in the book, he's basically made up, I can't remember what it is, like 7.5 hours in that day. In the week.
In a week.
Which doesn't seem like much, but
that 7.5 is not every evening of doing. You still have leisure time in between to catch up with friends. So that's like 7.5 hours you can be disciplined about to say, I'll do something productive other than my work.
Yeah. And he's saying that should be fairly easy to do without, and it's not going to be super easy. Like, you're not going to be able to use your life purposefully without sort of having to change it a fair bit.
But again, that's where I think it's in that at the end of that chapter, and I think him mentions it at the end as well, of how you start small.
Yeah,
I think that was one of kind of the one thing he put forth to be like, I'm saying this, but it won't come as easily at the beginning. So I would say, if I know it seems like a lot, and I actually was thinking about this to be like, there are times where I think I can say last year I arranged my week in such a way that I had something to do on every evening. And like I said, it is possible to do it, and it didn't seem like I was taking up more stuff. And this year I've like forgotten a lot of it, and I feel like I have less time now, but it's because I think I've gone back to the undisciplined nature of getting home, kicking off my shoes and be like, okay, I need to rest now. When I don't need to, I just need to do something different. Because I mean, on a Tuesday, I have a church commitment from 6 p.m. until it runs late. And I don't say I'm more exhausted on a Tuesday than any other day of the week. It's just because I think when I knock off any other day, it's now what consumes my time is like you're thinking of what I should do. The next thing you're just like, again, I become what did you say? If you start thinking about going to sleep 90 minutes before you open the bedroom door, you're bored. Yeah. So by the time it's 7, I'm thinking of, okay, I need to open the bedroom door. I need to go to bed.
And I mean, kind of like what he gets at earlier, if you some people think that doing that extra stuff, that sort of more intensive mental activity, or even just doing something else like going hiking or something, people think like, okay, but that's going to make you more tired for your work day. And ironically, the answer is almost the opposite. The less you do, the more tired you become almost. Obviously, there's a limit, but generally speaking, most people don't come close to those limits.
Funny you should say that. Like when I started gymming, I always thought gymming first thing is a scam. Like I would I would tell my like I'll probably be tired for that day. Up until I got into it and I realized I actually had better days on those days at gym in the morning than any other day.
Yeah.
And again, it's just our mindset. We just like to believe things that are not very true. I think it's just how we define things for ourselves that leads us to believe something is the case. Because in your head, you're like, okay, gym is intensive, or, I'll get tired and what does that mean for the rest of the day? But like you're saying, it's a different form. Like, I'm not doing physical work for the rest of the day. It's more mental work, which is like I'm resting physically, but I'm working mentally. You know, difference.
And even if you were to do mental work in the morning, you'll probably find that the mental work in the day, as long as it's different, is fine. And I think I've found that myself sometimes when I try on the rare occasions to do things like before work or after work. it actually makes me more energized during the work hour. But if I'm like, oh, I'm tired, and then you get into that sort of lazy habit, then I'm ironically less effective during the workday. Yeah. Okay, so going on to the next thing. So that was looking at blocks of time.
Yeah.
So the next thing is basically cultivating your mind. So the chapter title is Controlling the Mind, but it's the idea of generally cultivating the mind as much as possible, and it kind of goes back to thinking purposefully about things. So I'll read a few little snippets from it, and then we can chat through it. So people say one can't help one's thoughts, but one can. The control of one's thinking machine is perfectly possible. What, am I to cultivate my mind in the street, on the platform, in the train, in the crowded street again? Precisely. Nothing simpler, no tools required, not even a book. Nevertheless, the affair is not easy. So he's kind of saying there to those people on the train again, when can you cultivate your mind? Like, I don't have time to just sit idly around. And he's saying, take that block of time idea. Don't just do it randomly and intermittently. But when you have those blocks of time and you sort of waiting around doing nothing, you can actually use that as an opportunity to cultivate your mind. And then, he goes on to say, when you leave your house, concentrate your mind on a subject, no matter what, to begin with. You will not have gone 10 yards before your mind has skipped under away your very eyes, and your eyes are lurking around the corner onto another subject. I do not care on what you concentrate, as long as you concentrate. It is the mere disciplining of the thinking machine that counts. But still, you may say, well, let's kill two birds with one stone and concentrate on something useful. I suggest, and it is only a suggestion, a chapter of Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, which is funny because Stoic philosophy is the rage these days. The suggestion still holds. But he's trying to get at saying when you have those blocks of time and you can't, you were going to read the newspaper or do something like that, and maybe you can't do things like, I don't know, in our case, programming, or because you have to be busy, you're walking or you're doing something like that. Use that time to focus on a subject. And he's suggesting you pick a specific subject to focus on. And it doesn't have to be you learning about a subject. It can be you want to think through a speech to write on. It can be anything as arbitrary as you want to remember all the characters in a TV show. Like, I wouldn't personally recommend that unless there's a good reason you have. But he's saying it doesn't matter what you are concentrating on, but pick something specific and try and cultivate your mind in the same way that you would cultivate a garden. Try and cultivate your mind to be able to have control over it, so that when you choose to focus on something, you can focus on it and you can think through it clearly. And I think that will produce amazing, I guess, results is the only word that I can think of. Because when you focus on something, and you don't just do it sort of here and there, it's incredible what you can realize and come up with and think through. So cultivate your mind.
I think it was when you're saying that, I was thinking, was it in Deep Work when we read the section of how to memorize what's in a room?
And using mnemonics and things.
Yeah, what book was that?
I can't actually remember. But in Deep Work, he talks about... So I was actually thinking in Deep Work, like, either Cal happens to have come to the same conclusions as him, or Cal read him and adopted a lot of his ideas. They are just generally good ideas, so it
Yeah.
might have just been coincidence. But Cal references him in the book, and this idea of taking time to focus on things.
Yeah.
Cal also spoke
Yeah.
about, like when he said, when you go for a walk or do something like that, choose a subject
Yeah.
and focus on that subject and think through it. I think he might have even been the one that used the example of the speech. And things.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking about the room idea was also from one of those books where it's like you kind of associate thing. It's again, like you said, something that you know really well and associated to things in the room to help you remember and that ties back to concentrating. Like that's how you concentrate. Or in that process of you memorizing thing, you need to concentrate to some
Yeah.
higher degree, and you use points of reference. And exactly what you're saying, that if you, when you're cultivating your mind, or what's the
Yeah.
yeah, you have to pick a topic, because then that will sort of ground you. And in spending chunks of time thinking about something, you better know about that thing. And like I said, before you know it, you're thinking about the next thing to actually concentrate on.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think the idea of that focus, people think, I can't focus. There's no ways I can focus. And he also kind of gives the impression that it's not about having perfect focus. It's about training your mind to be better at that. I mean, the similar idea in the idea of meditation, even though idea there is to like sort of focus on your breath, or sort of try and focus on nothing specific. Well, I don't know if that's how it works, but
head to
often
toe, breaths,
the breath and things like that. And the idea is trying to gain more control over your mind, so that you
quiet down everything else and sort of only think about one thing.
So that you're able to steer your mind in the direction that you want. It's not just like, to use the TV example again, it's not like someone turns on the TV and instantly you just sort of gripped into watching. I definitely am like that. But so I have some mind cultivation to do. But I think if you're able to say, okay, that's not what I'm wanting to do right now, I'll watch some TV later at this time or whenever. But that will come from cultivating your mind. Yeah. So cultivating your mind, that's the third one. Last one is dangers to avoid. So he gives some dangers at the end. It's chapter 12. He gives some dangers to avoid when going through this process of trying to use and live fully. Use the 24 hours you have allocated. So let's go through those.
Are we going through them one by one, or you read them through and then we discuss?
Maybe I'll read the titles, and then I'll read the little blurb. It's not from the book, it's just like a small summary of them, and then we can go through them one by one. So the 5 are the danger of becoming a prig. And a prig is someone who thinks that they're superior to others. I don't know if it's like an old school word or if I'm just bad with language. Probably both of those.
Someone full of themselves?
Yeah. And then the second danger to avoid is overemphasis on time management, which reminds me of Oliver Berkman. I still feel like we should reread that 4,000
The
weeks.
word, yeah.
The third one is slavery to a program. The fourth is rush and overcommitment. And then the last and final one is risk of initial failure. Okay, so danger number 1 is the danger of becoming a prig. Bennett warns that too much focus on self-improvement can make you self-righteous and pompous, to a point where you lose your sense of humor and perspective. The prig tends to look down upon others for not recognizing the same, and he puts in quotes here, truths that they have discovered, making them socially tedious and less tolerant of others' views or lifestyles. Yeah, I mean, I think that's money, power, fame, genius, all of those kind of things.
So when you're reading that, The one thing that came to mind was like gym bros, you know, those guys.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it is like that. It's
You know,
with
it's
any of the
exactly that. Yeah,
any of those things where you are
you feel like, oh, I'm the fitness guru, and like everyone needs to live, breathe this. You know,
yeah, you almost are above average because of something that you've put effort into and stuff like that. Whenever that happens, there's the risk of getting that ego and just becoming apparently a prig. I wonder if this is not the nicest word, but I wonder if that's where prick comes from.
Probably.
Maybe, yeah. Okay, so then the next thing is overemphasis on time management. Bennett cautioned against becoming overly concerned with time management to the extent that one begins to look down on others who may not be as efficient. He mentions that the world has been rolling along fine, but long before you started budgeting every hour, and will continue to do so regardless. So, yeah, I think people go from not really managing their time properly to being like almost, I think he uses the term religious about time management. And yeah, I mean, you can see it on YouTube, and I love those YouTube videos, but you can see it on YouTube. Like there's just time management everywhere, and they're fun to watch, but you can get obsessed with it, and then think it's like the main be all and end all, but it's not.
Yeah, you actually have to apply yourself. You cannot just consume that material and not actually put it to use. You know.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing about how he advises against literature. You know, like not that completely, but it's like as much as you dive into it, but you need to take the time to actually do the stuff. You know?
Yeah, that's true as well. And he's also talking about sort of if you are putting it to use, like if you're very efficient with using that knowledge, and kind of ties the prig idea with the emphasis on time management. Even if you're very efficient at doing it, don't push that on everyone else. Don't try and be like, oh, Bob isn't as efficient as me now. I need to try and get Bob to be super efficient because Bob has been living. All of the Bobs in the world have been living happily lives without their time management stuff, and they're doing fine, and the world is carrying on. So don't worry about trying to push Bob to do or become as efficient as you. Yeah.
Bob works differently.
Then the next one, slavery to the program. Bennett emphasizes that while following a schedule is critical for personal development, becoming too rigid can backfire. A program should guide you, not confine you. Flexibility should be built into any schedule for it to be genuinely beneficial. I mean, that's just great advice in general. I think we've probably touched on it a few times in the course of the podcast, where say for example, diet. If you are trying to do a diet and then you eat a sweet and you allow that to derail you because you failed now, you're going to end off worse than you started because you were a slave to a program.
I was going to say one, now that you're reading that, thing that came to my mind was actually black box thinking. How you take a principle from something completely different into another space and essentially works the same way. Because if you're rigid, if you stick to your program, you believe if I'm doing this, I only consume material from this, and you kind of box yourself in. As it's you become very rigid about it. But yet, if you think about black box thinking, the whole calling out of commands and whatnot, which was used in the aviation world, which worked successfully, was also used in the medical field. You know, it's allowing that flexibility. You know, and I think it talks about how you can be that person that, oh, but at 6 o'clock I go for a walk. But if it's not 6 o'clock, then you don't do it. But you're like, even if you've missed it by 5 minutes, so you'd rather not go for a walk because it's 6 or 5, just because you missed it by 5 minutes, you know, because that's what that sort of mentality brings about. We need to avoid that, and I think that's what he's advising against.
Yeah, he uses the example of the like you say, the dog, taking the dog for a walk at this specific time. And then he goes further to say something along the lines of, it's sad to see sometimes there's like the husband who and the wife who I think it's something along the lines of this. They don't get along and they don't have a good relationship because the husband is so fixed on the program of saying, at this time I'll eat, at this time I'll take the dog to walk, at this time I'll read, that there's no ability to spontaneously say, oh, let's go on a date, or oh, let's have a friend come over, or etc., etc. And so you end up becoming a slave to a program, which, it's very
robs
unhelpful.
you of life.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of giving you life, which is often what you're aiming to get from that kind of program, you put it well, it robs you of life. Okay, then rush and overcommitment. Bennett also warns against the tendency to rush through tasks, continuously thinking about what has to be done next. The overcommitment can make one feel trapped and disconnected from life. The solution lies in reconstituting one's program and attempting less, avoiding an overload of commitments. So going back to that dog example, what can happen, and this is an example that he uses, is one can go from saying, okay, I must make sure that I walk the dog at 6, and then while you're walking the dog, all that you focused on, instead of just enjoying the walk with the dog, all that you focused on is saying, okay, I need to get back at this time so that I can start reading.
Yeah.
And then when you're reading, you focused on, okay, I need to be done by this time so that I can make sure I can get to bed or whatever the next thing is. And if you're doing that, you are basically just rushing through tasks and not thinking about them and participating in them. You're just doing them as check boxes.
Yeah.
And so the solution there, he says, is don't do that. Rather change your program. It's not bad to have a program, but change it to be more flexible. And also, in addition to that, or part of the making it more flexible, is trying to do less. Just avoid overcommitting yourself. Otherwise, you'll be like this thing to this thing to this thing to this thing. Yeah. Okay, then the last one, risk of initial failure. The last and most crucial danger, according to Bennett, is the risk of initial failure at the beginning of any new endeavor. Such a failure can kill motivation and enthusiasm for one's personal growth. Bennett's advice is to start slowly, perhaps even absurdly so, and to choose tasks based on personal taste and natural inclination. Yeah, so don't set yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
Whenever we commit to doing new things, a diet or a gym routine, or those are the classic examples, it can be saying, I want to start reading and commit to the thickest book you can find, or the gym routine is I'm going to go to gym every day, etc. And you're basically setting yourself up for failure. And the answer to that is commit to way less to reduce the risk of failure, even if it looks absurd, because if you can succeed at that little thing, then you can add a little bit more, and you can take a little step and then atomic habits.
I know. There are two ideas that you said the other, like that's typical atomic habit. Even like the scheduling one, I was like, that's like, that chaining of habits. That you don't have a specific time, but have one habit remind you of the next one. So you don't have to, and I mean, when you're talking about starting small, I mean, think about us committing to reading a book a month. It started with us, we're reading, was it a chapter a week?
I think we read like one book in a year something like that.
I know, like Atomic Habits took us a whole year to probably finish.
Because I think we did do probably
in 2 years, we read 3 books.
Yeah.
Which one we finished at the beginning of this year? Because it was Atomic Habits, 4,000 Weeks, and Attach.
Yeah.
That was in a span of
Yeah.
a year and a half.
Just
to
like
2 years.
Atomic Habits, 1 year. 4,000 weeks, 1 year. Attached, 1 month.
No, we started Attached way before.
you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
And then we switched it up to be like, okay,
Ah,
it would be like a sample project that we're like, no, now we're committed
right.
this year to a book a month.
yeah. Sure.
So, yeah, we started very small.
Yeah. Like a word a day almost.
So, yeah, I think, and I mean, yeah, all this as well just reminds me of, like you said, Atomic Habits. You start small, you know, and ties in with the graph of it. It's those small incremental changes. The 0.1 is better than a 0
Yeah.
over time, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know if you have some concluding thoughts, but what did you think about the book?
Nothing much. Different, but still along the lines of very similar to most of the books that we've been reading. I don't know. I'd want to go over it again because I felt like when I read it first time, there's still some ideas that I still wrestled with. Not that I didn't, but just trying to understand them better.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I actually want to try it out. You know, be very intentional about what I do. You know, when I start my day, and again, like start small. Start with very obvious things and things that I trust I can succeed at.
Yeah.
Before taking the big leaps. You know, I think so often we leave things to like, oh, the new year, I'll do something different. I feel like now for me is the time to be like, okay, what can I switch about for the coming year? And maybe start it now. And yeah, I think maybe every day after work, you know, at least give myself my commute back home as a break, but just
Maybe every other day.
every other day as a start, not every day, as every other day. Yeah, thank you for not overcommitting it. Yeah, but just to do something, even if it's different, but just thought provoking.
Yeah.
You know, try not to be as idle.
Yeah.
Because like you said earlier, you know, so often we feel more rested from doing nothing, but that's actually not the case. That's when we feel more tired.
Yeah.
And I feel that's where I'm at now. So yeah, hoping to try it out. Be more intentional about that 1/3 of the day. Because yeah, like I said, my 8 hours of sleep is important. So
Yeah.
my 2/3 I know is gone. So it's just better position when I have my supper, so that I have you know enough time to do something a lot more productive. You know.
Yeah, maybe I might shift supper. Depends if Jamie's fine with it. But maybe shifting supper to like straight after work.
Yeah,
And
like
then
by 6 p.m. you've had your supper.
Yeah.
And then,
Because eating early is also not a bad thing. But yeah. But there's lots of little tricks and tips in the book. And yeah. Sorry, I don't know if you have...
No, that's...
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, I really enjoyed the book. Maybe a quick side note as well is that we read it from the Gutenberg Project, which the reason is because, as I've mentioned before, the book is over 100 years old, which means that the copyright has expired. So, like, anyone can go and get this book. And it's a very short book.
Yeah,
like, I think if you were to read it, if you're a fast reader, you could probably read it in under an hour.
Yeah.
For most people, maybe an hour and a half. If you just sort of sit down and flat out read. So it's not a long book. And I think it has some really, really good reflections. We touched on some of them. And I think maybe that's one of the things that people can use their extra time that they find
Yes.
to read this book.
If you're trying to pick up the habit of reading, there
Yeah.
you go. That's part of that hour 30 minutes, or that 45 minutes in the morning. You can read a few pages.
Yeah, and I think it's just really great to keep on getting the reminders of how to go about spending time thinking through things, cultivating your mind, and trying to realize like what are those different things that you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And as we've spoken about, a lot of those books, the different self-help type books, touch on similar topics.
Yeah.
And so it's cool to see that and to sort of try and realize like, okay, these things have been spoken about for very, very long time. I mean,
centuries.
we're referencing deep work and those kind of things, which reference this book. And this book probably has ties back to Marcus Aurelius and those kind of books. Or, sorry, that's not the book. Meditations is the book, but Marcus Aurelius is the author. And so those kind of Stoic wisdom books. And I think the theme goes all the way through then. And it's just great to see that and to try and draw on those ideas and be reminded of them. And then, like you say, try and put them into practice. So, yeah, I'm hoping to do the same. And I guess we'll check in, see what happens.
Yeah.
But
Cool. Thank you very much, James.
Thanks, Peter. We will chat again.
Cool.